Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. Thank you for the positive response to the recent emergency episode, Living Remarkably During a Pandemic, the Coronavirus edition. Some episodes launching around now were taped prior to the start of the crisis. Others were taped after. This one was taped after. I ask you, could you imagine starting over and pursuing a new remarkable life? My guest co-host and I speak to an old friend of mine, Lisa Slavid, who's starting a new chapter, or as we conclude, she's beginning to climb her second mountain. Lisa is a great guest because of her remarkable solo life, but she's also an expert in strategic planning and gives you some tips about how to become a better planner, including how to plan to climb your second mountain. We cover a ton of great topics, including asking whether you have money problems or time problems, or perhaps both. We discuss the book, The Four Agreements, and the dangers of human domestication. I disclose how much I like it when people bet on themselves. I also cry on the air, so pay special attention for that. One last thing, do you want to get involved in helping get the solo word out? Do you have some social media skills and want to help? If you do, please let me know. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Lisa Slavid. Lisa is an expert in strategic planning, positive psychology, strengths building, motivation, and innovation. She has over 25 years of experience designing learning workshops, programs, and keynote speeches, working with organizations from corporations, universities, and nonprofits. She's an organizational consultant, an executive coach, a semester at Sea trustee, and the director of organizational and performance management at UC Santa Barbara. Lisa is also the creator of P-Doodles, the cartoon. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Pete. Hi.
We are joined by a guest co-host who was a previous guest on the podcast, Isabella Imani. Isabella is a LA-based relationship and behavioral coach specializing in helping clients through inner alignment and goal setting. She has more than 7 years of experience in personal development and partnering with leadership of Fortune 500 companies such as Blue Cross Blue Shield, Live Nation, Viacom, and Paramount Studios. She's also a professional speaker and previously worked in HR and operations. She was the recent guest on the emergency corona pandemic episode. Welcome, Isabella.
Thank you, Peter.
So it's great to have both of you here. Lisa, I thought we would start by asking you to tell listeners how we know each other. And Isabella, she doesn't know either.
We know each other because we both started as resident directors in 1994 at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I feel like I remember meeting you in the interview venue, and you don't remember that.
I don't remember that. So first of all, Lisa and I were both alive in 1994 and eligible to work. And so, yes, we would you say we were resident advisors? We were basically
RAs with master's degrees.
Yes, we managed residence halls. We were paid not well to manage residence halls at UC Santa Barbara. So I managed San Nicolas, San Nick.
Yeah.
And you were in Santa Cruz.
I was in Santa Rosa.
Santa Rosa.
The first residence hall at UC Santa Barbara.
Yes. And it was a hard job. For at least the first year, it was a hard job.
There was a lot of transition.
Yes. So Lisa and I became good friends, close, thrown into the fire.
We did. I remember a sunset walk because it was also at the beach, so it wasn't actually that hard. And we had a top 10 list of top 10 things that don't suck.
We did?
Yeah, we did.
It sounds like such a thing we would have.
Especially with Letterman at the time, yeah.
Do you remember any of those things?
Working by the beach, I think was one of them, yeah.
It was an idyllic location. Yeah. Yes, so this is in Goleta, which is about 13 miles north. Anything else that people need to know about us knowing each other. I don't remember meeting you during the interview process.
You were in like one of the foyers and we said hi to each other and you just said, I just think of everyone here as a potential new colleague, so I'm just going to make friends.
I love that. Do you guys have any like embarrassing stories from one another that you can share?
Oh, I'm sure Lisa has some about me.
Yeah, I'm not sharing them.
I don't mind, actually. Yeah. It's okay to share them. If they come up, please don't hold back.
Okay. You're blushing though.
I can't wait.
I'm sure. That is really funny. So I will tell folks what I remember about Lisa. So one of the great things about Lisa was, first of all, she was highly competent. So she was good at this job. She's whip smart, but then she also has this really creative artistic side, which I remember her sort of exploring even back then. Drawing, you were drawing a lot, if I remember correctly.
I think I drew us and our two friends, Steve and Kanae, all as Simpson characters back then.
Yes, okay, that's right. And we would also, so there was also something that we would do. So we were both mostly single back then.
True.
And so some things don't change. But we were not as good at it as we are now. So there was a lot more angst and anxiety and I felt like a little bit of a fish out of water. So I was an East Coast boy. I'd moved there from New Jersey. I dressed like an East Coast boy. I had up to that point, very provincial life. I hadn't traveled much. And I was going west. I was really excited in going west. And then I ran smack into this very challenging job as a 24-year-old. And so it was really useful to have a good friend like Lisa that I could rely on both personally and professionally. Obviously, we would go on walks and talk and so on. And then we had some other friends, Steve and Kanae, who have since been married and have 2 children. They live in Santa Cruz, and we would do burrito nights.
It was classic.
It was great. So we would do burrito nights, and we would play cards, and it was probably a weekly, bi-weekly. It happened frequently.
You used to grade us on how we made our burritos.
I still do that sometimes on how well people wrap their burritos.
Is there what's the strategy here?
Don't overstuff.
Don't overstuff. That's the first thing, because otherwise, if you overstuff, your burrito becomes a tostada.
And if you make it too wet, it starts to fall apart, and then you get an F. You get an F on your burrito.
Good to know. Oh my God.
I gave a lot of C's. Steve got really good at it, so he's a competitive dude. So that's right. I've done burrito nights my whole life. I kind of retired them in the last couple years, but I did 20 plus years of hosting burrito night. It's a big winner. People love burrito night.
I can't wait for the next one. We're going.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll see. But burrito night had a long run. Anything else that comes to mind that we need in terms of a basic?
I think just the thing too is that we would talk about more than just work, that it was cool to hang out with you because you were curious about other things. And I think I got to hear a little bit of the inklings of where you're going to go with your doctorate, just about, well, why would that be? And, positing questions. And that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah. So Isabella, it's fine to jump in with any sort of questions or anything you have. I'll say one other thing before we get a little bit more deeply into this. I think it's really fascinating that in many ways, Lisa and my lives have diverged and now we've come back together, and that there are sort of some interesting parallels that are happening. It's funny how that is. So Lisa stayed at UCSB, moved around the university a bunch, and I left. And I went to all places, Columbus, Ohio, to do a PhD. Mm-hmm. We did have some other things in common. We both went on semester at sea multiple times.
We both date women.
That's right. That was Lisa probably was dating more women than I was back then.
Spitting game.
I'm not sure. We won't compare now. But I
serial monogamist.
But I and so for me as an aside, that was I had always had a very progressive attitude. I grew up in a really diverse neighborhood I was the white boy in a black neighborhood growing up, and went to a very, sort of a diverse state school, had lots of different types of friends. But Lisa was my first very close gay friend. And so for me, and our entire staff was incredibly diverse at the time. So there were 6 hall directors. And so I was the only straight white man for at least one of those years.
True.
And so the nature of the conversations and the perspectives and so on I was all open to it all, but it was, even for me, pushed me way ahead of, I think, a lot of my peers and so on in life. So Lisa stayed. I left. Obviously, I did this academic career. I'm now back in Southern California on sabbatical. I'm contemplating, what a next chapter in my life might be like. And so Lisa's not contemplating it. Lisa is turning the page currently.
True.
Yes.
True.
So what's really cool about her is that I typically have 2 types of solo episodes. One is with an expert who might be able to impart some wisdom and ideas in the world. And one is with someone who's living a remarkable life. In this one, we have both together.
It's a lot to live up to.
No pressure.
Okay, fine.
Do you want to talk about that?
The chapter?
The second chapter and what prompted it, what you're doing?
Yeah, I think for a while I've just been contemplating. So working at UCSB has been fantastic, but I've been there for 26 years. I think part of the longevity of that has been able to go do semester at sea and travel 4 times around the world.
Maybe tell people what Semester at Sea is.
That's a great comment. Semester at Sea is an academic program that takes about 500 to 600 college students around the world for academic credit for the same amount as it would cost to be at a land-based campus. And we go to about 10 different countries. You study on ship in between ports, and then the students go explore, sometimes with their faculty in the ports. And it's transformational. The community that forms on ship is amazing. And it's been cool to get to meet experts from all around the world and hear from them kind of what life is like back on their home campus or company or country. And so that's kept me young, I think, and also at UCSB for a while. But a couple of years ago, it started percolating this little bit of friction between work and some other things I wanted to do. And I realized it wasn't about work. It was about time.
I love this.
And so the more I thought about it, the more it just started quickening. And I wouldn't call it a health scare. I had a health anomaly last year where my ear was tingling. I call it my spidey sense that I went and got it checked out and everything was fine, but it was still an anomaly. Like, why is my ear tingling? And so during that whole piece, I just zeroed in on, hey, what's really, really important right now? Given impermanence. And to me, it was launching. It was launching this next phase and not waiting 5 years.
Is impermanence a nice way to say we're all going to die?
Yes. It's a nice way, but it's also a wise way that, yeah.
It seems less. So Isabella talked about this in our previous episode. So, it's like words matter. So you say bad versus you say challenging.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So when that happened for you, I mean, like, what was it like an immediate realization that like, oh, fuck, like I got to go do something different? Or like, what was that process like where you're like, this is the second chapter. This is the end of the first one. This is me leading into the second one. Was it like a gradual process or was it just like definitive?
It started to feel like a gut process.
Yeah.
It involved several beach runs and it just got, during the beach runs, it got really clear about what was really important. I didn't want to lean into or think, oh my gosh, I only have a year left. That wasn't the philosophy I wanted to lean into. Yeah. Yet that thought crossed my mind. And so I leapt though to the second part of that, which was what's really important. What do I want to do? What do I want to put out into the world as my contribution or gifts? And it was really a lot more around art and actually spending time with my family who spread all around the country and actually other friends too. And so that was the time freedom. And as soon as I felt this click, it was like going to a life chiropractor, like everything aligned, like it's time. Yeah. It's just time.
I like that term, a life chiropractor.
I do too, and I like that you talk about alignment. Obviously, that's something. That's something.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing.
I talk about that so much in my work. My little tagline for like kind of just describing what I do is reprogramming subconscious behavioral patterns through inner alignment and goal setting. And the inner alignment portion, at least in the context of my job, encompasses like a lot of psychological and coaching frameworks. And so, like when you say inner alignment, it's crazy because that's a tug at your energy.
You're a life chiropractor, Isabella.
I never thought about that,
That's
but maybe I should add that
incredible.
to the
That's
title.
what you are. Yeah.
But I love that. So when you started to get this emotional tug of like, gosh, something feels out of alignment, for some people that can be really scary, right? Like they're like, oh, like what do I do? Do I stay in this job? And there's more or less like an internal conflict. And then when you decide to really kind of like move forward and take action, I mean, there's one or two options. You either stay where you are or you move forward and take action. So you're obviously moving forward and taking action. But how did you that bravery that comes with it, that courage, like, can you explain what that process is like for you? Because I know you're currently living it right now.
I am. So part of my role has been strategic planning. And so sometimes I apply that to my life, obviously. And so that was what I was like, okay, what things do I need to move to make this happen? So once everything clicked that this decision was going to happen, it was scary and empowering and exhilarating. And
how long ago was this?
A year.
Okay. I think that's important.
That it was share that it was that long of a process.
Is that big changes, they don't happen like they do in the movies.
Right.
Right. So little changes can happen fast, tidying up.
Yeah.
That can have an important effect. But big changes take often, especially if you're going to undo 25 years of living in Santa Barbara and working at a university.
Exactly.
And pursuing
That's
a particular
so brave.
career, it takes a lot to make that change.
A huge shift in your mindset.
It was, and there was strategy in different levels. So when I decided that, I also decided, well, let me drop down to 80% time at UCSB and really up the consulting I was doing externally. So that was part of the experiment. And I also decided, let me get out vending some of my cartoons a little bit more, and doing more markets and fairs just to see how viable those were. While having, and the third element was not just, UCSB is not just a safety net. It was also thinking about, this is a really meaningful career. And so how do I wrap it up here? Also, what is my work left to be done? And I had a great conversation with my mentor and supervisor, Willie Brown, who I'd like to just surface here. I said, Willie,
shout out to Willie Brown. He was working at UCSB when I was there.
What up, Willie?
Thank you.
Yeah, he's brilliant and kind. I asked him, hey, Willie, he gave me a lot of flexibility too. I told him early, and he said, you got to follow your heart and your gut. And the other piece is, if anything changes, just let me know. And so he also shared, when I asked him, hey, what would you like me to work on this last year? And he said, any ways that we can continue to touch people's hearts and souls here at UCSB. And so he's been a huge reason I've stayed, and it's hard to leave, but it's, after years of coaching other people, it was just really clear, I have to follow my own advice, and the energy is taking me away from here. I also want to say I'm really grateful to UCSB because I can leave and start healthcare. I can start a pension, and not everyone can do that.
Yes, I understand. There's a certain privilege. There's a privilege in terms of being solo. So if you were married with children, this might become harder.
True.
And so the fact is that you have a lower, I always talk about burn rates, right? So you can reduce your expenses that can allow you to do this. You also took care of business financially for 25 years, in terms of both like the place that you worked, but then also I know how you live. You're not you're an experienced type person. You're not a material type person.
That's an excellent summary.
Yes. So okay. A couple quick observations, and then I want to get back into, because I want the listeners to learn a little bit about strategic planning, and I think we should just use you as someone who teaches it, talks about it, writes about it, and then someone now who's turning it and using it on themselves. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating is that if you're lucky in life, if you take care of business, your money problems go away, but they're replaced by time problems. And so you either have money problems or time problems, or unfortunately, some people have both. And so you realize that you have time problems, right? You were no longer struggling to make ends meet. You were struggling to do all the things that you want to do.
Yes.
And this is important, not do the things you don't want to do.
I'm tracking.
Okay, you're tracking. So basically it's like, this happens a lot in people's careers. They get good enough, they move up the chain, they start to have more and more responsibilities, and sometimes they get further and further away from the things that get them excited. And now they're spending a lot of time around a rectangular table under fluorescent lights, talking about stuff that deep down is not really going to make anything matter. And so I'm not saying this is for you per se, Lisa, but I'm saying is like, and you just go, I'm not sure I ever want to sit around a rectangular table anymore under fluorescent lights. And so that may prompt some changes. The second thing I want to highlight is I love that you didn't just jump in and just one day you just walk in, you just hand someone your resignation letter and like, I'm going out in the world and I'm going to make my new way. Rather, you started to experiment. What will this next chapter look like? And that's reminiscent of a previous episode where I talked to entrepreneurs and we talk about how do you spin up a new business and when do you quit your day job? And a lot of that was after trying it out, paying attention until you get to a point where you go, either, okay, I can do this, or, oh my God, I have to do this.
Yeah.
So
I love that you said that too, because I know, like, when I started my company a few months ago, well, it's been longer than a few months, like 6 months ago, I kind of did something very similar where I was like, I love what I'm doing. I was head of HR and operations for a management company, and I loved the company head over heels, in love with everyone there. But I realized that there was a disconnect in terms of alignment. Like, I still loved people. I was head of HR and operations, absolutely loved people, but I didn't love it in the capacity that I was doing it in. And so, kind of very similar to you, I was like, well, what do I do now? What's the balance here? So, and I'm sure we've all heard kind of the thing where, if you're going to take that next step, do your regular 9 to 5, right? Because that's kind of what pays the bills, and incrementally shift out of that. But what you can do in the meantime is, while you do your 9 to 5, basically 5 to like midnight, like that's when you can devote that time to your passion, and you can maybe just like dabble in it a little bit. Maybe like start that website, see what happens. Maybe, draw a few of your cartoons that you're really proud of, and just, you're like, oh yeah, this feels good. This is doable. Maybe if I attend some more art shows and get some external feedback. I love that you did that, because I think that that's really thoughtful and strategic, which kind of set you up for success for this next step.
Thank you. And that resonates. It reminds me of Hudson has a theory of adult development and 4 quadrants. So there's doldrums, which is the only one you want to gently move yourself out of. Cocooning, which is you're just kind of getting new information and resting up, and then new adventures where you go out and meet people. So adding to your 5 to midnight thing, that's also a great time to just to go out and have.
We're both writing this down.
And have
this is really good.
It's a cool time to go out and have new conversations with people and just hear how they put it together or what they're exploring. The 4th phase is go for it phase, when you're ready to launch. And so you can be in different phases for different aspects of your life. And again, the only one that they suggest that you gently move yourself out of is the doldrums. That's
so it's
being
doldrums,
stuck.
Cocooning,
New adventures, and the go for it phase.
Got it.
That's a Hudson from the Hudson Institute.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm writing this down. Sorry. So we don't know what's happening with Corona at the moment. And so I think at the time of this taping, it feels like people are doing a lot of cocooning.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this is a new thing for them. I live in a world of new adventures and going for it all the time. Probably my problem is I don't cocoon well. I'm a bad cocooner.
It doesn't work that way, but if you want to call yourself a bad cocooner, go for it.
I'm challenged by cocooning.
Exactly. Isabella's a good influence.
Thank you. I'm a quick learner, though. So I think that's great. But what I think is sort of interesting is, especially the doldrums thing can help spur change. Like, I think who knows if we're still alive, and things are kind of getting back to normal at the time that this is playing. I want good to come of this scare, which is people thinking about thinking about their impermanence, and thinking about their day to day, and starting to think about what a second chapter may be like. So, if I can ask you this, Lisa, can you give the world, the listeners, a sort of primer on strategic planning? Just the basics of it, just to help orient them, and then how you sort of use those principles as you were kind of moving forward with the second chapter.
Sure. I use a model called appreciative inquiry, which is basically building upon what has energy, what gives life and energy to something, or what's going well. It's not so much appreciative in, hey, you are great, but appreciative and let's build upon this. It builds upon itself.
So you ask yourself, what's going well?
As you start to think about planning for what's next, there's a model. It's called the 4D model.
Of course there is.
Of course, right?
I love these models.
There's so
I'm
many. That's the
down.
problem. I mean, I'll put this stuff in the exhibits, of course.
Okay. And there is an appreciative inquiry commons, and David Cooper-Ryder and Dr. Diana Whitney both did a lot of research on this and have great material and books on it too. And they did research that when you do planning with organizations, if you give them the opportunity to think about past successes and their strengths, that the challenges that come up, they feel more capable of solving. And so the 4D model, though, is dreaming, discovery. I'm going to get it wrong. I have to do another take. It's wrong. Discovery, dreaming, designing, and delivering.
Huh.
So this sounds like, okay, so you said discovery, dreaming, designing, and delivery. So if I may, it sounds like discovery is this sort of impetus. I recognize that there's some disconnect between where I am and where I'm at.
Discovery is more, that might even be that, which is essentially, it's a cycle of renewal, essentially. Okay. I think the discovery is it's a time for reflection. Like we go so fast. And people are making huge decisions off the cuff, which is a great skill set. And what happens when you slow down and just get a moment to reflect and actually talk to other people in the room and build upon, instead of fear, build upon some wisdom. And so the discovery is, hey, let's talk about recent successes. What worked really well? What do we feel really excited about? What gives us energy? And then you pose questions. So there's an appreciative inquiry interview. You pose the question of, tell us about successes, tell us about a strength, what's giving you energy right now. And the classic question is, what are one or two really big, bold wishes you have for the future?
That's the dreaming part.
Yeah.
That's the dreaming part.
Can I ask you those questions then? So just to kind of flip it back on you, since you're kind of our case study here. Is that too much? So no. Is that too much? I feel like that might be helpful for our listeners. I mean, I'm curious. Like, what was that for you? Like, what was going well? What wasn't? Like, what? I mean, and what was that reflective process like? Because I think sometimes we get really paralyzed with fear during that discovery portion of it. And something that I realize when I'm working with my clients is, and Tony Robbins says this really well, is questions are the answers.
Yeah.
But sometimes we don't even know what questions to ask ourselves. So when you were asking yourself, how do I move forward? What is this next stage in my life? What was going well? What actually ignites this passion in me?
Yeah.
Like, what was that like for you?
It had its own impetus, in terms of this ear tingling, but that for me all along, I was kind of operating under the assumption of time. Like, oh, I have time to do this job and to write those books and to continue to do cartooning and to do merchandising for that and to consult. And so I realized, okay, actually, I might not have all that time. And so the question that started to surface for me is, what's really important? What's really important right now? And what's really important to me. And so there's a values base to this too, which is why I think a lot of organizations do work with what their values are. But also I do a lot of work with people, it's along the lines of the Leadership Challenge, by Posner and yeah. Sorry, I know Posner. So
it'll be in the exhibits.
Okay, thanks. About kind of what values guide your life. And so for me, the question that emerges is, what's really important right now? And what do I want my contributions to be for this next phase of my life?
Can I ask how much the fact that you sort of study these things, talk about these things, did you start to go, maybe I should use some of these things on myself? Or was it that you had this, your spidey sense, and then it set you down a path and you're like, oh, look, I have this whole repertoire of models that I can use. And did you fully like sit down with a piece of paper and go and work it out, or did you just work it through your head as you went on hikes and beach runs and so on?
I worked it out more through my head. And I would say I have applied a lot of these models to my life over the years, but this was one where I added that element of impermanence to it. And it actually, again, talking about alignment, everything just snapped to about, to not procrastinate this.
Yeah.
And to step into it.
I love that you keep coming back to the word impermanence, because something that we find too, especially like, when we're goal setting and we're trying to accomplish our goals, is when we can actually identify as our goals and like really embody it as being a part of our identity, those goals are more likely to come to fruition and be more sustainable long term. So like when you're really committed to this, where you're like, you know what, I actually won't be here forever. Like, what do I do now? So now it's a part of your identity, and there's almost like this race against. I mean, that sounds silly, time, right?
No,
I
do feel like I have this thing I call it the big day theory. I say every day's a big day. And part of the reason I feel that is like I have a lot of things I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm filling my days, I'm filling my weeks, I'm filling my months, I'm filling my years, and I have fewer years than I did. I mean, seeing Lisa, so Lisa and I had lunch recently. I was up in Santa Barbara on business and saw some old faces. And Lisa and I got to catch up one-on-one, and it was really delightful. I just have so much affection. I'm going to cry right now.
Aww.
I have so much affection for her. And so I think for me, it was kind of it was an interesting day. It was like this really reflective day, seeing a little how the town had changed a bit, seeing how my friends had changed. Everybody was 25 years older.
Yeah.
Or not quite. And I walked away knowing that I had made the right choice by walking away from that place. So it's a place it's sticky. Santa Barbara's a sticky place. It's hard to leave. The weather's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's an easy life if you can afford it, and I was glad that I went off and had adventures and built a career and, done all these kinds of things. And then Lisa tells me that she's leaving. And I was like, wow, because of the stickiness of it all.
Yeah.
I think. And so I was delighted to hear that, because I think Lisa's bigger than UCSB.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pete. The affection's mutual.
Are we going to start all crying right now?
That was really sweet.
No, I'll cry later. But that was sweet, and it's mutual. I've been tracking you. You're big in my life and what you go and explore with the humor code and talking to people around the world and taking risks. And when you just started your quote, like every day is a big day, like I jumped in, that quote resonates with me. I have a side project in my head about thinking about cool people in my life who have neat quotes, and I love to draw them with their quote.
Oh.
And so I have lots of side projects.
I have too many quotes.
That's okay. I have lots of side projects in my head. But you need to know that after we met, I think that was, when was that? January? No, December? When was that? In Santa Barbara. Anyways, a couple months ago, that you called me a couple weeks later and you said, Lisa, I just want you to know I'm really excited and proud of you, and I love it when people bet on themselves. And that's been like one of my guiding stars through the nervousness part of this. So thank you.
I do. I love anybody out there who's betting on themselves. I'm a big fan of that.
Samesies. I think this is really cool to witness too, and I know that you guys have a really deep relationship, and I'm just getting to know both of you in real time. But what I love about this, so have you guys read the book? I think it's called The Second Mountain. I forgot who it's by.
No.
I'm like reading 3 different books right now, but I just finished.
Lisa and I are writing this down.
I just finished this one yesterday, and so essentially it talks about our first mountain, more or less, is ego driven, and this is a generalizing statement where it's like we're conditioned to go to school, go to university, get that job, and the family and the cars, right? And some people actually spend their whole lives trying to reach the top of that first mountain. Many of them don't. But for those that do, maybe it just ends there. And essentially in this book, it talks about the first mountain being more ego-driven, right? Where it's just like, we're expected to get this job. We're expected to have that high earning salary. We're expected to have this family of this idea. The second mountain is what they talk about, which is where most people don't ever really get to. But if you are fortunate enough to get there, it talks about the importance of the second mountain, where it's less ego-driven. It's all about how do I serve? And in watching both of you talk about your careers, and Lisa, for you especially, coming out of your first mountain, saying, because you've spoken a lot about this, and I think the common denominator here, especially for both of you, is adding value and contributing. It's less about, because you've already had your long career, at UCB. Did I say that right?
UCSB.
Yeah, UCSB.
UCB is the improv. That comes up on this podcast too.
But what's really cool is witnessing you go through the second mountain, and it's more about contribution. And I've heard you say contribution several times now, which is really cool. And what I love about also continuing on to this conversation, and this is the nerd in me referencing so many books, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yes.
So one of my favorite books. It's a quick and easy read, but I know, Peter, you and I talked about this before. It starts out in the first 5 pages talking about human domestication.
Yes, thanks for returning to that, because we did not address that enough in the previous episode, and I regretted it.
So essentially what it talks about in terms of human domestication is what I said about the first mountain is, we're expected to fit in these little boxes, and our thoughts really are thoughts. The fact that, who knows, eating ice cream for breakfast, is that right or wrong? Who writes these rules, right? But the fact that you're coming out of this and you're saying, what, I had a great career. And that doesn't take away from the now. That's a part of you. But you're like, what, I'm choosing something more. I know that life is so much more than just what I had here in Santa Barbara. And you're betting on yourself. And you're saying, I'm going to take this risk because you know what? Life is really short. I think that's so powerful to witness, especially and you as well, Peter.
Do you want to react to that? And then I have a question.
I also love.
Sorry, that was a huge round of applause.
What are the 4 agreements? Just to quiz you too.
So the first one is be impeccable with your words. So say what you mean. Always
use your word in the service of light and truth.
Yeah. Always do your best. So even if your best is just getting up in the morning, if that's the best that you can do, you did your best. The other one is
don't make assumptions.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
Look at you two nerds.
And all right, give me the last one.
Don't take it personally.
Yes, don't take anything personally.
That's great.
But these are really, really powerful, very simple agreements to live by, but super powerful. But especially as we talk about this with the listeners, how to come out of that thought process of, this is what is expected of me. And I think so many people, especially solo listeners, are like, well, what is expected of me at age 30? What is expected of me at age 50? Bringing it back to that, who the fuck cares? What is expected of you? What the fuck do you want to do with your life? And then do it. And that's so powerful.
I do think there is something about if you live your life to make other people happy, you're going to make yourself unhappy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I do like the first part of that book too, the 4 agreements. If you do nothing else, just learn the 4 agreements, period. It's great. But
I love that you read that.
The first part of the book too is, thank you. I love that you were spouting it off too, is about the hundreds of agreements we make with people all the time that we're unconscious about. And I think that kind of relates to what you're trying to do with solo living a remarkable life, is bringing some of that consciousness out of hey, what are you agreeing to?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, where does it say that I have to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, what is the second chapter going to look like? People are listening. They're like, well, what the hell is this woman going to do?
What is she going to do?
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Are you in the delivery phase right now? Or are you in the designing phase?
I am in who knows what phase we're all in right now.
Well, sure.
I'm in the designing phase with some delivery. You're transitioning.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, and some experimentation in that too.
Okay, so what to the best that you can, what's the second chapter looking like?
To the best that I know,
the second mountain.
Ooh. Oh, quick note too. I have another mentor, because when you do leadership development and strategic planning, you get a lot of cool mentors in consultants who work with you. So Luann Daly wrote a book that talks about outdwelling and then indwelling and the journeys of that. And so outdwelling sounds a lot like the first mountain, where you're accumulating things and you're kind of on the tracks, and then indwelling is what's really important.
I need to interrupt. I'm so sorry. I think there's a little bit of a mini lesson here in a show don't tell kind of way, which is the number of books that you two have just referenced. I don't know if the average person knows this, but like books are like a cheat code to living a good life.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so when there's these sort of common denominators of very successful people. So one of them is that they take care of themselves. So they're good about getting sleep. They eat well. They exercise. So both of you, so Lisa, you've already referenced exercise. Isabella, before we were talking about this, she's talking about the hike that she's going to go on later today and the good healthy food that she ate this morning prior to this. Reading books is one of those other things. It's very difficult to find a highly successful person who not only doesn't read, but doesn't read a lot of books.
Absolutely.
In part because there's this, what's called a compounding effect of reading books. That is that reading 1,000 books is not 1,000 times better than reading one book. It's 10,000 times better than reading one book. And so people might be like, oh my God, another book I got to read. But that should be a welcome moment. I'm going to list all of these.
I actually really love that you said that. So growing up, I had a very turbulent upbringing, very non-traditional upbringing in so many ways. And so I didn't have mentorship. I started college when I was 15. We lived in poverty and we just didn't have that. And so I decided at an early age, I wanted so much more for myself. And that's exactly what I was going to go after and living it right now. And I'm so grateful for that. But what I realized too is with the turbulent upbringing that I had, that also didn't allow me the opportunity to have a lot of mentors. So a goal that I made for myself, which is one that I live, because you are what you do, not what you say you'll do, is I read a minimum of 1 book a week. I've actually finished 3 this week. And then I listen to a podcast a day. Because as we know with
let's not forget about the importance of those podcasts.
Oh, fuck yeah. Those
podcasts.
Rock. This one in particular.
They rock, especially if you have to stay at home for long periods of time.
But what's cool about it too is unless you're learning something new every single day, then you're still reliving. And this is where a lot of people get in the same mindset and going back to your impermanence thought, right? If you're living, breathing, doing the same thing every day, tomorrow is not going to be any different than today was, right? Unless you're constantly learning or you're challenging yourself to try that new dance class, to meet that new person. It's all about learning, and that's actually what pushes the needle incrementally. And if you do this often enough, and it's a consistent part of your behavior, you're not going to be the same person 6 months from now, right? You're constantly going to be evolving. But going back to your point about books as well, it's another form of mentorship if you can't get it directly. Mm-hmm. But it's also just another form of pushing the needle and expanding your mind, because it's really your mindset that gets you from point A to point B.
And some really interesting neuroscience and all that too, about how we get stuck in habits and what happens when we encounter something new, and how it activates all types of new neural pathways.
Oh yeah, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about that. He is a neuroscientist who talks about I think he talks about epigenetics and how our genes are more or less passed down from generation to generation, mm-hmm. and our environment plays a factor in our thought. So right, if you're triggered by a certain environment, that'll trigger your thoughts trigger your emotions trigger your behavioral patterns, and you get in this cycle until you can elevate your thinking outside of that. That's the short thought of it, but just yeah.
Another book.
So okay, so what the hell are you going to do?
Well,
tell us everything.
I was trying to think about, sometimes it's more fun to see something visually, but when you're talking about living a good life, it reminded me of one of my cartoons, Asparagus Tips, which are a bunch of asparagus giving tips. And so one of them is get outside, get outside for a little bit. The other one says floss daily. And the third one is saying be awesome. But I think I'd like to edit that to read a book. That sounds, I think we're going to update that for the podcast. So what's next is going to be a blend of wherever kind of consulting and coaching takes me, and cartooning. And so there's a lot to do. People ask me, Lisa, are you worried about when you don't have the 8 to 5 anymore? Which ironically used to be 9 to 5, according to Dolly Parton. But I'm not worried, because this is what my weekends look like. I'll read and I'll go for a run or a hike or a walk with friends on the beach, and then I'm doing things, thinking about what idea do I want to do over here with the cartoon? What kind of product could I do? What kind of cartoon do I want to draw? Just even on the way down here, when I'm driving, cartoons pop in my head. They pop in the middle of the night. And then I have other things I want to do too. Like,
so one thing is, so let's talk about pea doodles, because we've referenced it a couple times right now. So one thing that you're going to use this time for is to work on your art.
Yes.
To work on pea doodles as well as other artistic projects that you have.
Correct.
Okay. So I have to say this. I love your pea doodles.
Thank you.
I remember when it popped up in my social media feed how many years ago?
I started pea doodles in 2009.
Okay.
But it started going viral in 2014.
Okay. So I think I probably saw it, though, early on,
Yeah.
10 years ago. I'm sure I reached out to you.
You did. You said you were killing it.
You have a good memory. Boy. So I knew that I had reached out because I was really moved by it. Also because, I did like one of these little sort of like Tiger Wood fist pumping motions because I knew that Lisa had this in her from way back in the day, from seeing her doodle and fuss around.
Yeah.
When we had quiet moments in our life. And so I was just like, oh, this is great. And also, so how would you describe, I'm going to do a poor job describing pea doodles. So what exactly is a pea doodle?
A pea doodle is...
They're going to be, I'm going to have some pictures in the exhibits, of course.
They're mainly one panel cartoons that are play on words, and they don't typically involve people. They involve, they started with fruits and vegetables and then small animals and inanimate objects. And that was just, it was just fun. And they came to me. It used to be like doodling in the margins. And then I got a tablet in the margins. So suddenly I was doodling on computer, and then Facebook opened up to the world beyond just the .edu. And they embody a lot of my values. They're all almost 99.9% of them are nonviolent. Celery stalking is not necessarily nonviolent.
So I have one in front of me right now. It's a picture of a 4-leaf clover that's been anthropomorphized. It has a little 3-leaf clover. Thank you. See? 3-leaf clover. Thank you. With a little smiley face and little tiny arms. And it says, actually, I feel pretty lucky just the way I am.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need to be a 4-leaf clover
to be lucky.
Yeah,
yes, I love it. It's great.
And then this other one, I'm looking at this one here. It's a mint, a mint leaf, a cartoon mint leaf, and it says, "You can do it. You've got this." But underneath it says, "Encouragement." So I see the play off words. It's so cute. It's very charming.
Thank you.
I love.
All right, wait, one more.
Okay.
And then maybe you could talk about these 3.
Sure.
And the other one is, so it's a small key, like a key that you'd put in a lock, again with a little face and little tiny arms, and it says, "I'm a little door key."
Aren't we all?
And I could see that. I could see all of these in you.
Yeah,
Lisa.
yeah.
One of my favorite quotes, and I'm a sucker for a good quote, is, and I don't know who said it, but it's a creative adult is a child who survived. What I love about witnessing your second mountain in real time right now is just seeing you as an adult as well express your creativity and this playfulness. And I think that's something that, with human domestication is lost over time. We tend to take ourselves super seriously, and for whatever reason. But I just love seeing this side of you emerge. It's really exciting, actually.
Thank you.
I may have named so sometimes I know the name of the episode beforehand. Sometimes it comes to me afterwards, and then sometimes I get it while we're doing this. This episode might be called Lisa Slavid's Second Mountain.
Oh, nice.
Oof.
Or it could be the pea podcast. Like green pea. Sorry.
I see.
Yeah, sorry. Pea doodles. Sorry, we'll go with yours.
So can you take us through? So you start doing these pea doodles. You're going to be doing more of these as well as these other projects, like you were saying. The idea of this sort of the picture of the person with their saying.
I have lots of, it just flows. It's part of the engagement piece is that when one's doing what they love, when I'm doing what I love, it's generative, it's sustainable, it just comes. So I have over 1,400 of these now, and they're all original. I won't say, oh, no one's ever said encouragement before and meant with a little mint, but this was original. And so if I've seen that someone else has done it, I don't draw it. And now the field's gotten a little bit crowded because people love a good food pun, but I think I might have had a little something to do with that. And what I want to do with these is, there's just great opportunities to put them on to apps and all of the emojis and
make some merch.
Make some merch. But what I really love about these, and I got a message this morning from a relative who said, "Hey, Lisa, I hope you don't mind. I sent the encouragement over to somebody who was working internationally and can't come home and has two kids." And so to me, that just kind of continually highlights that they're based in values. These little doodles are kind of based in the values of kindness and some humor, but compassion for sure. And they've become vehicles of love. And so it's really meaningful to me to see when they get shared. It's not so much like the ego of like, I have 200,000 likes on George Takei's page. There was a little ego there, but it's more like, oh my gosh, people are using this as expressions of love and caring with one another, and to be able to have a little bit of magic. They're pixels, and then they just get spread around the world like that. To me, that's really meaningful.
So you talk about your values, and I love hearing you say like kindness and compassion. Where do those values stem for you? Like, were you tell me more about that. Cause I love, and that's a different story for everyone, but you as the artist, as the creator, wanting to share your art with people, where do those values stem from for you?
Well, now I'm going to get a little teary. They stem from my family and from people who I met along the way too, who I also consider family. Lots of mentors and teachers and colleagues. And actually, UCSB is a pretty magical place with great people. I'm really honored for all the students I've met throughout the years who have also taught me kind of like this playfulness. And it can be intergenerational playfulness, but the values come from my mom and my dad, and they both taught me about, in their own ways, about respect. My dad taught me about like always shaking people's hands, being perhaps a little bit gentler with someone who might be much older than I am, and not do the firm handshake because they might have arthritis, but like nuances like that. Nuances like that. And both compassion. My mom, really empathetic, really compassionate. She was a social worker for 20 years for patients with Alzheimer's at the VA, and also creativity. Like, I really remember vividly waking up one morning after my mom had been away on a trip, and I woke up and in my room was an easel, a plastic sword, which was really cool for me because I love the whole superhero thing, with also Wonder Woman. And the easel was like art. I just was really encouraged all along the way, and they just allowed to have me to be an imaginative child, and with lots of books. I mean, the books all stand out to me. I got a little teary-eyed because I love my folks, and I'm lucky to have them both still alive right now. And I was supposed to see them all next month, and I don't think I'm going to get to do that. So, yeah.
I think that's a really beautiful story. I also, and can I ask one more question?
Course,
I feel like I'm hijacking a little bit.
This is good.
What I love about just hearing you speak is how you're bridging your passion with like kind of your current existence, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there might still be an element of fear as you're going through this discovery design phase of your life. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like how you're able to say, I'm choosing passion, not necessarily over fear, because that obviously is coming with you, and that's a part of the process. That's a part of the entrepreneurial process, or just life in general. But you're choosing that more or less over that. So you're allowing your passion to really just drive, the fact that you're able to kind of like burn your boat, so to speak, and pursue this full time. But can you explain that process, what that's like for you right now, with like bringing that fear and overcoming it?
Yeah.
In pursuit of your passion.
As much as I have a handle on it right now, it has been about planning, like Pete said. Like I didn't just jump into this. And so there's been like a year of planning. I downsized. So I lived in a adorable cottage solo up in the mountains. Now I'm a little bit closer to town, another adorable cottage, but with a roommate. My friend Gary had an extra room, and so he was gracious enough to say, yeah, come on in. I cut my housing costs by 50%. And so I took steps that, even though that was a big change, this is going to enable me to have more time freedom. And just talking to people.
You'll be a little less cocooned.
I'll be a little, exactly. Literally, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah, like, your place up in the mountains, you alone kind of thing, versus now you're down in the city and you have someone you're close with.
Yeah. But making sacrifices for the things that you love, I think, is what I heard too.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people are also fearful of that. I know that I was. When I was starting my career, I was like, oh my goodness. And I was making a substantial income. And I'm so grateful for that as the executive role that I had. And I was like, oh shit, am I going to have to lose that in order to pursue this life of freedom that I want? Thankfully, it didn't take me too long to build that back up. Just by the grace of God and a lot of hard work, but that isn't always the case. And making those sacrifices, that's to be expected when you're really pursuing a life of meaningful purpose.
Yeah, there is something that I think needs to be stated here, and I'm going to be the guy who does it. There's an interesting, I don't know the right way to say it, but there's this sort of interesting tension that exists. So for someone who's considering the kind of change that Lisa is and that Isabella did, there's often you take a step back financially. And so that's seen as a sacrifice, right? So I'm giving away a steady income, and some of the security, knowing that that check plays. I wish there's like a Nassim Taleb quote about like, there's nothing worse than a regular paycheck in terms of living like your best life, because it can make you lazy. And it can make you play it safe, and it can, play it secure and so on. I actually think in the case of Isabella, we were already seeing this. You might have taken a step back temporarily, but you're doing financially as well as ever with your own and on your own terms, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think is going to be fascinating for you, Lisa, and of course, this is not a requirement of your second mountain, but it's a possibility of a second mountain, is if you allow yourself to dedicate more time and energy, resources to your art, your art is scalable in a way that your university job is not.
right.
And so, sure, you might end up making less money for the next 25 years than you did in the previous 25 years. That would be fine. You can do it. No problem. But there's a chance that you don't just make the same amount of money, but you make 10 times the amount of money as a result of that. And I will say this, your pea doodles bring people joy, and people will pay for value.
Yeah, thanks.
And so I don't think there's anything wrong with, turning art into commerce. And so what I'm excited for is to see what could happen as pea doodles moves from 10% of your efforts, to 50% of your efforts.
I'm excited for that too. I was always hesitant to make my artwork for me, like to put pressure on these little ones. I don't feel like I'm doing that. I feel like I'm making art and I'm trusting the universe and putting it out there and seeing what happens. And I think you're right. I think it's scalable. And even if it's not, I invested my time where I wanted to.
Yeah, this is not a requirement for your second mountain.
Right,
it's just the potential of the second mountain. I will tell you this: it wasn't going to happen if you were still doing your 8 to 6 or 9 to 5, whatever, 8 to whatever it is.
9 to 5.
9 to 5.
And I also, if I can acknowledge this, and I don't mean to be political with it, but to me, I often wonder if we did all have healthcare, what other dreams people would be pursuing.
Well, I think this is an interesting thing about this country, which is on one hand, it's one of the better countries in the world to be an entrepreneur and to be innovative, as demonstrated by the great innovations that are being produced.
Yeah.
Then the question becomes, well, if there were some systematic changes in like you said, that you don't have to tie your healthcare to a job,
right? Might
people take more risks? So,
or do more of their passions.
That's what I mean.
Grow more things, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is all about risk and reward. Reward and risk are correlated.
Yeah.
I want to ask about your switch, your move down the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a Facebook post that I'm not on Facebook much, thankfully. I have been a little bit more because I've been trying to get the word out about solo, and so I've leaned a little bit back into it. But I came across one of your Facebook posts. I'm just going to read it.
All right.
Lisa's like cringing
no
right
pressure.
now.
I'm
but
excited.
You did put it out on Facebook.
I did.
Lisa writes, being a strategic planner, I've been very methodical about my upcoming move. I've known for over 3 months that I would be moving. So I've been sorting, giving things away, upcycling. What's upcycling?
Reusing something.
Oh, I see.
So the simplest example is this shirt has holes in it. I will use it to clean
Oh, great. Okay. Marie Kondoing, parentheses, truly letting go of things and lightening up, properly disposing of things and donating to my favorite local thrift store. This is Alpha Thrift Store in Santa Barbara?
Yes.
Okay. And yet here I am with moving week being this week and somehow still finding myself in that phase of holy shit, this is still a lot of stuff and dropping things haphazardly into boxes and bags. My conclusion, there's no escaping that part of moving, at least for me, kudos to those of you who have reached this level of adulting.
It got even crazier.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Like, if you saw my car right now, like I've moved, but there's still things in my car. I don't know where they go. And there's no sense to what's in the boxes right now.
And so I noticed that because I went through a little sort of a similar thing. So I started early on things. I learned that thankfully like early in life, to start early on things. So I had to pack up my house that I had been in for 10 years in order to have renters and in order to move into my box in the sky. So I just needed many fewer things. I also love a good tidying up process, both emotionally, psychologically, and so on. But I had exactly the same. I started way early, and as it was approaching, I was like, my goodness, there's a lot to do. And so this is just a friendly reminder to people is like, you want to start early on things as a result of that. But there is something that's really, I think, freeing about that experience. So what makes tidying up difficult is something called loss aversion. Okay? And so you've got this t-shirt. T-shirts are good ones because t-shirts are, and if there's sometimes there's sort of psychic value associated with a t-shirt. It's associated with an important concert, important person, or important time in life. But the average t-shirt, there's no psychic value in it. And you say, I haven't worn this t-shirt in a year. I'm a grown-ass man. I don't wear many t-shirts anymore. Anyways, like it's not like when I was in my 20s and I like lived in t-shirts. Mm-hmm. So there's a potential loss and a potential gain to upcycling it, turning into a rag, or donating it. You probably shouldn't be throwing away t-shirts because you can use them for other things. And so the gain is the space in your closet, in your bag, in your box, whatever it might be. In terms of decision making, it's sitting there amongst a bunch of other t-shirts, which you have to think, am I going to wear that t-shirt or not? And then you say no, right? So you're saving decision making time and energy. But there's a potential loss, which is giving it up. You have to recognize that I'm losing this thing, and that, well, what if I'm the anticipated regret of, what if I ever need it or want it, and that pang that you'll have with it.
I would add to that pang now too. I'm trying to shrink my consumer footprint, and so I don't want to have to give up something that I might need to buy again later.
Yeah, so that's where the regret comes in.
It adds to that what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Like, like sort of old clothes that you wouldn't wear anymore, but you're like, well, I might need them for a Halloween costume. that kind of thing.
Yeah. I can paint in these.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What if I gotta,
Yeah.
I love that you say that. One of the questions that I ask my clients is, what are you willing to lose in order to gain? And this is an exercise that we do in terms of, write that one down. That was pretty good.
It's really good. It's really good.
We don't even need the mics rolling for us to get something out of this.
So what are you willing to lose in order to gain? And so it's an exercise that I do in terms of assessing our old self versus our actual self, and then our ideal self. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to bridge the gap between our actual self and our ideal self. So then I ask them, what are you willing to lose in order to gain? Is that people, right? What are there certain people that are not adding to your success or this new ideal self that you're trying to show up as? Are they holding you back? Or is that, or are those like trinkets? Are those memories? Are they, is this adding to your mental and emotional clutter? If it is, remove it. to the best that you can.
Yeah, it's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's not easy, but just assessing that, just ask yourself that question is, what are you willing to lose in order to gain? And as you're taking on this new chapter of your life, that's not saying remove my old identity at all, but it's really just saying what parts of that do I need to strip away from? Maybe it's that person that used to play really small working at a university. Maybe I need to lose that self in order to gain this new entrepreneur life that I'm showing up as, who, this person who speaks in their truth and that, that actually stands with that momentum and like that lives in freedom. So,
yeah, I can tell you that. So getting rid of stuff is so difficult that Marie Kondo uses this standard, which is, does this bring me joy? Right? So that's designed to overcome loss aversion. And I can tell to those of you who are considering doing this, especially if you've been kind of hunkered down for a while and trying to make your space a little bit more livable and cleaner, so I have done all of that. Lisa, you've done all that now.
I've done, and I've also moved 25 times in my life. So this is,
So you're used to doing it.
I'm used to doing it.
But you know what? The fascinating thing is you almost never miss those things. Like I can tell you this, I have a big box of clothes that I didn't bring with me on this hiatus to Los Angeles. And I can't even remember what they are. Like, what I mean? So I clearly don't miss them, because I can't even, like, it probably would be fine if someone just took that box and just dropped it off at Goodwill. And my life would not be altered in any meaningful way.
Yeah. There's a TED Talk about being a minimalist. And I think sometimes people think minimalism means like living cheaply or leaving I don't know, like whatever, but essentially it's
living in a cave.
Yeah. Right. And that's not it. It's just like not having more than you need, right? Living a simple life, but one of quality. And I think that's a big takeaway is as you elevate in this second mountain that you're taking on, it's just like quality of life. What kind of quality of life do I want now? Is it one of possessions, which I already have? Or is it one of, going back to what you said earlier, is it one of experiences? Not just ones that I curate for myself, but curate with other people.
Yeah. Your t-shirts are not going to help you achieve your life goals.
No. And you talked too, Pete, about the decisions. Like there's the less you have, or if you can make a filtering decision, which is I'm just seeking quality, then you spend less psychic energy on sorting, packing. I haven't worn this, even physically moving it around in your closet or in your cupboards. Like, so using that quality filter, I think helps us free up our space to do bigger dreams.
Indeed. So Isabella, one of the things that you were saying, I think, like, look, it's kind of easy to talk about t-shirts. It's much more difficult to talk about people. And so what you were referring to, and this probably is not a word that you use, I noticed, but I will use it, which is toxic people. It's a little bit of a buzzword these days, so I hesitate to use it. But there's a conversation that's starting to happen in the kind of sort of public vernacular. Certainly there's been research on this, and from an organizational standpoint, again, is oftentimes removing a toxic person, a person who's causes conflict, who's mean, who's negative, who's a bad example, whatever it might be, who doesn't uplift, has more of a benefit to an organization or to a person than adding a wonderful person. And this is connected to that idea of loss aversion. Loss aversion is a special case of what's called the negativity bias. And the negativity bias essentially says is that negative things have a much bigger effect on our emotions and our health and our well-being and our attention and our moods and nearly everything about us than positive things. And so one of the paths to living a remarkable life is not adding more and more good things. It's removing those challenging things, those bad people, the things that are sort of in the way of what it is you want to achieve.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I know that for me and for anyone, but I'll just talk about my experience. When I was starting my company, it was really scary. I got so much pushback of, what qualifications do you have, or who do you think you are? You might be too young, or like whatever it may be. I heard it all. And it was really interesting. I actually heard a lot of that feedback from the people that were closest to me. And what I had to do was I had to use my discernment to say, this is them acting out of fear. questioning because they're fearful of my success and like they're projecting, and that's okay. Like, being as grounded as I am, I'm grateful that I was able to see that. But the reality is if I continued to allow those thoughts and those behaviors to influence from that place of fear, that actually might have held me back significantly. And so it got to a place where I was like, okay, what behaviors can I no longer tolerate as I level up? I even had to look at that in terms of my dating life, where I was like, okay, if I'm going to be this boss ass Isabella, CEO of a company that will soon grow exponentially, what even mindset disciplines do I have to actually like enact now? Does that mean, like not dwelling for 3 days if a guy doesn't call me back? It's like, no, I don't have time for that. I need to start letting go of even my toxic behaviors.
His loss.
Yeah, fuck that. I mean, that's never happened. But just in the off chance that it did, even I had to say, what toxic behaviors do I have to let go of within myself to say that I won't allow this as I free up mental and emotional space for this elevated person that I'm becoming.
So Lisa, you're embarking on the second chapter. So where does your sort of dating life? This is not really a podcast about dating per se. It's hard to ignore completely when you talk about solo living. And I think one of the cool things about living a remarkable life is that it has this sort of ironic outcome of making you a really appealing partner. Right? People are energized and excited by people who live their life unapologetically, who are making art, who are creating things, who wake up saying today's a big day. We like to be around people who are inspiring and energetic and fun and creative and so on. And so I'm curious in terms of where you're at. Have you noticed any of that? Where are you with regard to relationship wise? I think
because I've been wrapping up at UCSB and launching new things, I haven't noticed. I'm running the race right now, and it's a solo race, and the time freedom that comes with that has been really relieving. I've had the great honor and joy of having had great relationships throughout my life. Grateful for those folks. And I'm not saying no to relationships in the future, but right now it's my filter is on that not now. And also, if the right person came along, I trust the universe. I trust that would happen. But right now, my focus, it's been so freeing just to focus on some of these projects, on this change, on reflection. And I think, to me, that it's just added to the time freedom. And so I think I'll leave it at that. There's a little energy here and there, but I'm still running the race. It's like the middle of the marathon, and there might be some flirting, but we're not going to stop and have a date in the middle of the marathon right now during these changes.
That's great. Yeah. I have this saying about solo but not alone. And, so you use the marathon metaphor. You know what I think is really cool? Like, you run a marathon, it's actually not as solo as you think it is. And so, for example, you need someone to set up the marathon. You need volunteers who are going to hand you cups of water. And so one of the things listening to you, Lisa, as you talk about this is, yes, you're responsible for what's happening in your life, and you're the engine and you're making it go. And maybe you're not having love affairs along the way, but you're not alone in this, right? You have this roommate who clearly has is a supportive person. You talk about your boss and encouraging you, not trying to hold you back, hold you down. One of my exes is storing stuff for me. Yeah, all of that. Yeah. I think that's like a neat idea in terms of just remembering that we need people, and we should be, to your point, Isabella, I think really is important. It's like, we should be careful who those people are. Yeah. Are they acting in this is I do this all the time where I keep referencing previous episodes. So in a previous episode, the dating friends and sleeping with strangers episode, we talk about what makes a good friend. Right. And so this is sort of my current list: trustworthy, reliable, energizing. And then I haven't figured out the exact word for it, but a good friend you can go to with good news and they'll celebrate with you.
Mm.
And you can go to them with bad news and they'll commiserate with you. Right? That is, they don't go, oh, that's really good, Lisa. Yeah, I've got this book coming out too. Yeah, it's really great when things are going well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not a good friend. And a bad friend is like, oh yeah, that sounds tough. I know exactly what that's like because I got all this tough things going on in my life where it's not your friends aren't competing with you.
Yeah. The power of proximity is a real thing. I know there was a study done about it, and I'm sorry, I'm just throwing out a study, and I don't actually know the details of it.
Right.
Science.
But we'll just we'll
sprinkle some science
I
in.
just think it's important to just even reference that. So then, just to like put in some curiosity there. But the power of proximity, and I'm sure we've all heard that like the 5 people that you're surrounded with the most, like can really add to your success or take away from it. And so just being mindful of where you place your energy, especially in times like this where it could feel a little uncertain, right? It's not as grounded as before. So just making sure that people add to that level of like stability, especially like to support you during, just times of uncertainty. And I think that like that's so cool just to watch this journey evolve for you.
Thank you.
So Lisa, any last ideas to come back to some of the strategic planning stuff that listeners who are sort of thinking a little bit, like I would say this. Someone's listening, they're inspired. What's the first step that you would suggest that they take to move that inspiration into action?
I just had like 10 steps jump
I know,
into
but
my head.
you just need to get people moving.
Find a good question. Find a good question and find a good person to be mutual. Ask that question of each other, or maybe they have their own good question, but find a good question that helps you evolve.
Okay, so what might that, like, what would, if you were to go back and try to get back to your run on the beach? My question was, what's really important? What's really important?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wrote down Isabella's question, what are you willing to lose in order to gain? It could be, what do you want to gain? It could be, if I could have more of something that didn't involve money, but like more of something in my life by design.
Yes. Mine would be, what if I never had to sit in another faculty meeting?
Yeah. Yeah.
What if I never had to sit around a rectangular table with fluorescent lights? I'm not saying that's my question, but that's one that popped into my head.
Right.
That's there.
Well, and I put the appreciative inquiry spin on that, which is you typically take the wording and make sure, instead of saying, hey, what really sucks about this place, you say, hey, what's 1 or 2 wishes you have for the future?
That's good. That's approach oriented rather than avoidant.
But sometimes for people, it's you do have to ask what the pain point is, and that actually is part of the motivation to move.
Well, yeah, negatives are sometimes more motivating than gains.
Yeah. I just want to add too, because the thread of this conversation has been fascinating, and I also want to just add the UCSB was still really rewarding.
I know. Don't worry. We're not shitting on UCSB too much.
But that I'm moving on to my second chapter of offering things. But that it still is like, it was a meaningful role.
Yeah.
By the way, yeah, I want to say this. Look, it's not about UCSB or the University of Colorado or whatever company that Isabella worked with. It's about organizations. And so they serve a purpose. And they can often serve as a platform and a place for growth, and obviously a place to get health care and a steady paycheck, and to have collisions with impressive people and so on. I'm not disparaging all of that. It's just sometimes what happens, and actually I write about this in my new book. Sometimes it's time to take either a bigger place, a bigger platform, or a bigger perspective.
All of that. All
of those things. And it's just, you may not find that in your home institution, in your Fortune 500 company, in your government job. That's my only point. And so it's not, I appreciated my time there also. It served as I mean, look, I traveled around the world twice within 4 years because of the experiences I had there and because of the people I met. I'm grateful for it.
Right.
So
I just wanted to make sure no one thought I was leaving toxic colleagues because I'm still working with them for 3 months and they're awesome.
I don't think it sounded
Okay,
like that.
cool.
I think actually for me the thread that I heard was actually less about even like the corporations portion, because like, I mean, I thrived in mine. I loved all of mine and everything that I had. Like it was the most amazing experience. I think for me the thread that I'm hearing is the human domestication portion of it. It's just thinking. It really is just a matter of thinking outside the box, because every role that I ever held led me to where I am now, and everything like played its part. It's just really, I got to a place in my life where I was like, I was ready to think outside the box and do what I want to do on my own terms. Mm-hmm. And it really was going back to what you said. And actually Tim Ferriss writes about this in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, lifestyle design.
Yes.
And so when I was thinking about leaving my job, the simple question I asked myself is, all things being equal, if all pay were equal, if I were making my millions, what would I be doing? And I landed on this, and I'm like, yeah, this feels right. This is alignment. So all things being equal, and then just pursuing that relentlessly, because that's the purpose. That's what, the driver is.
That's super, Lisa.
Oh, can I say one more thing before we wrap up?
Course.
Because part of my messaging that's been really clear to me recently has been about how everyone is creative. And I don't mean just arts and crafts creative, but like by the definition of creativity, we're often comparing ourselves to big C genius creatives, but everyday creativity. And so a lot of my work has been. And so if we're going to do we are doing a podcast, I'd be like, that is part of the message I would want to get out there too, about how do you increase your own sense of agency through creativity?
You know, and I think the first step in that is to say, I'm a creative person.
Yes.
I started thinking of myself as a creative person 10 years ago. So I managed to recreate my childhood energy.
Ooh, inner child.
Yeah, inner
theory.
child alive as a 40-year-old. Once I started thinking of myself as a creative person, referring to myself as a creative person to myself and to others, guess what I started doing?
Creating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Here we are.
So I'm just thrilled that you two did this. And Lisa had other plans that were canceled today, and she still came down. She left the bubble of Santa Barbara and came down to the big city to sit with us. And then Isabella has been so great about just saying yes to everything that I have asked her to do. One of the ideas that I think is important to do is, if you want to encourage people to live a remarkable life, it helps to tell them what a remarkable life might be. And that's difficult because there's no one remarkable life. There's only remarkable lives. Oh my God, I'm going to cry again. And so so Lisa's path is a path where she is clearly leaning in to this. I like this PERMA model of Martin Seligman. So pleasure, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And I think Lisa's always leaned into the R, to the relationship one, whether it be in her partnerships and her ability to maintain positive relationships even after breakups. The fact that we're still, even though we don't see each other much, have this connection 25 years later. She's always had this engagement, this artistic, creative part of her person, and just to see it just keeping rising up in her and something that she's leaning into with her second chapter, I think is fantastic. And I think, as I said, with her doing that, who knows, the achievement might follow, as a result. And so I'm very excited
Thank you.
for your remarkable life, Lisa.
Oh,
I am too. You're going to do so well. So excited.
Both.
And so, Isabella, thanks for your first guest co-hosting gig.
Woo-hoo,
She was great.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you an A- for as a grade.
Whoa.
Wait, why is it A-
Yeah,
bad?
for real.
Isn't A- supposed to be good?
Excuse you, have you met me? I'm a perfectionist.
Maybe he's saying there's always room for improvement for all of us.
I don't care what he's
I know, right?
We need to work on your mic work.
A little A++.
We'll get you an A.
Oh, actually, that's fair. I deserve an A- for that.
Is that human domestication? What are you doing?
Lisa, I'm not going to give you a grade. I'm going to say that you're great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who's listening. I've just been overwhelmed with the number of people who are reaching out to me calling me, sending me text messages, sending me social media messages, telling me how much they're enjoying the podcast. It's been so encouraging. It's making me work harder than ever on this side project. So much so that I'm looking forward to growing it. So thanks to all of you, the listeners. I hope that you are happy and healthy and finding ways to thrive during these uncertain times. Thank you and cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a